The worst advice I've ever gotten is to be realistic. If you clicked on the video to hear that, then you can go ahead and click off. But if you care about your success and your future and becoming your best version, then it's in your best interest to watch the rest of this video, because in this video, I'm going to be giving you some game that only the top 1% of people know. Now, here's the thing. Being realistic isn't so much the problem. The problem is where your realism lies, what your sense of realism is. You see, realism is not objective, it's subjective, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand. Realism is contingent on the environment that you grew up in. It's contingent upon your personal indoctrination, your personal programming, your personal conditioning from your upbringing, from your perception of your upbringing, the conclusions that you've drawn based on the things that you saw, the things that you observed and experienced in your life, and especially during your formative years. For example, if you have two people with relatively similar intelligence, as a matter of fact, let's just say equal intelligence. Two people with equal intelligence, one of them is from the projects, one of them is from a wealthy neighborhood, a gated community, and they were raised a millionaire, in a millionaire household with two parents. Which of those two people do you think is the most likely to be successful? More often than not, the person who was raised in the wealthy community will be more successful. Not because they have more talent, but because their sense of what is realistic is simply different than the person who grew up in the projects. Because if you grew up in the projects, you learn to use that same level of intelligence in a different way, in a way that keeps you within that bubble. Whereas the person who grew up in that wealthy neighborhood, in that millionaire household with both parents and different caretakers, nannies, and the whole nine, their sense of what's realistic is much more expansive than the person who grew up in the projects. So therefore, even though they both may go on to live very realistic lifestyles, given the conditioning, the indoctrination that they personally have bought into, their actual lives will play out very, very differently because they have different perceptions of what realism is. Now, in my personal opinion, I think that it behooves you to push the boundaries of what you see realism as, because that is the only way that you will ever achieve things that you've never seen before. What is logic? What is rationality? Logic and rationality are simply ways of saying that you have to see it before you can believe it. And that right there is what keeps the 99% where they are, where the 1% is able to progress not only their own lives, but the lives of the 99% by extension. The people who walk by faith and not by sight are not only expanding their own boundaries, they're expanding the boundaries of everyone around them. They are showing other people that it is possible to expand beyond their sense of realism. This is why being realistic is terrible advice. And yet, I feel like so many of us, we hear that time and time again from the adults in our lives, from people who we trust, from people who we look to for guidance. But they're not doing it with malicious intent. All they're doing is projecting what they know. They're recycling the information that they got from their parents, and so on and so forth. But you have to understand that society still progresses. How is that? Why is that? It's because of the people who don't think realistically. You see, that 1% of people who don't think realistically, they move the needle so much that they actually shift the trajectory of the whole entire race of mankind. That is how powerful being delusional and walking by faith actually is. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people say you need to be delusional to be successful. And I know that on the surface level, it is very illogical. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Because you need to start going beyond your sense of what's logical. And when I say be delusional, that doesn't negate the action that you need to take. But what you have to understand is that the plan will oftentimes not be laid out for you until you see it retrospectively. For example, I did not think this was possible. I didn't think that it was possible for me to make a living doing what I do right now. And yet here I am. In retrospect, every decision that I made, every leap of faith that I took, that was absolutely petrifying at the time, is completely logical. Me dropping out of school, it's logical in retrospect. Why would I have stayed in school? I ended up being a YouTuber anyways. Me quitting my job to go full-time on YouTube with, I believe, 600 or 700 subscribers and about $600 in my bank account, that seemed illogical at the time. Everybody thought I was tripping, bro. The only person who seemed to have genuine faith in me, at least from what I recall, was the head manager of the store that I worked at. And that spoke volumes. That spoke volumes to me about why he was the head manager out of anyone else. It's because his unbridled optimism, which, by the way, used to really piss me off when I worked for him, because he always wanted the best from us. He wanted to push us beyond what we thought was reasonable. That optimism is what got him into that position. And in that moment, I had a paradigm shift. I realized that the vast majority of people are where they are because they think realistically, because they are not delusional, because they're actually reasonable and sensible people. You see, if people don't look at you funny when you tell them about your dreams, that means that either one, you have a really, really good circle, you have a circle of people who are on that same wavelength as you, or two, you're not dreaming big enough. You're not dreaming big enough. And for the vast majority of people, that's going to be the case. The latter will be the case. You are not dreaming big enough. If I told you that anything is possible for you, what would you do? What would you do? How would you live your life? How would you map out a perfect day in your life? How would you map out a perfect week in your life, a perfect month in your life, a perfect year in your life? What sounds too good to be true? If you can see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand. But not only that, you have to believe that if you can see it in your mind, it's already yours. It's not a matter of whether or not you deserve it. It is already yours. Because in you seeing it in your mind, you have just tapped into the frequency of that reality. And the more often you tap into that frequency up here, the sooner and the more efficiently your outer world will reflect that. Now here's the thing. When you make that decision to be delusional, in spite of your circumstances, a lot of times you experience what is known as cognitive dissonance. Now, what is cognitive dissonance? Cognitive dissonance, in layman's terms, is basically a discrepancy between your inner world and your outer world. And your outer world includes your behaviors and your actions, your behavioral patterns, the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. When there's a discrepancy between your inner world and your outer world, when you believe that you're a millionaire and yet your bank account shows that you have $500 to your name, your mind, your subconscious mind, is going to do everything in its power to close that gap, to offset that discrepancy between your inner world and your outer world. Now, there are one of two ways that you can close that gap. The first way is your outer world can change to match your inner world. In other words, your bank account can grow such that you have $1 million in your bank account to reflect that $1 million mindset that you have. Or two, your mindset can diminish to match your outer world, and you can develop a $500 mindset to match that $500 bank account. This is what the vast majority of people do. They dumb themselves and their dreams down in order to find that middle ground between their dreams and their reality, or what seems to be their reality, because reality is malleable, it's tangible. You have to understand that your reality, the things that you see and feel and hear, all of your sensory perceptions, these are all subjective. So, in other words, the same opportunity may be present in the lives of the person from the projects and the person from that wealthy neighborhood. But the person from that wealthy neighborhood has been conditioned to identify that opportunity, whereas the person in the projects has not. Therefore, one person takes the opportunity and one doesn't. This is the difference between delusion and realism. And a lot of people, they say be realistic because they believe that having low expectations makes them immune to disappointment. But it doesn't. It guarantees disappointment. You are living your life in a perpetual state of disappointment by being realistic. Realism is just a euphemism for pessimism at the end of the day. If you're being realistic, you are living at the very bottom. You are living at the baseline of what you consider to be a good life. You deserve to not only be at the top of your perception of what a good life is, but you deserve to transcend the perception altogether. You deserve to manifest things that you didn't previously think were possible. You would have never even thought to imagine because you hadn't been introduced to them. And that is where delusion comes into play. You have to be delusional to the extent that you walk by faith and not by sight, because faith will take you to places that your physical sight could never take you. And this is a very, very, very difficult mindset shift to make. That's why only 1% of people do it. But there are a few ways to facilitate that process, to expedite that process, such that you can not only cultivate this life for yourself, but influence thousands, if not millions of other people to do the same thing. And the first way you do that is by embracing solitude. When you're making this mindset shift, you're going to have one of two options. Either you're going to have to be by yourself while you cultivate this mindset, or you're going to have to surround yourself with positive people, or a combination of both, which is ideal. Nevertheless, you need to remove negative people from your life. If people are constantly projecting their own limiting beliefs onto you, you need to remove them from your life. If you can't do that, then you need to have a conversation with them and say, hey, I need you to stop projecting your negative limiting beliefs onto me. They will be offended by that when you say that, because it reminds them of that discrepancy that they refuse to see. It reminds them of their unfulfilled potential. But ultimately, that's their problem, not yours. Okay, and at the end of the day, by you telling them that, you're probably planting the seed in their minds that will enable them to start actively seeking out the fulfillment of their true potential. But right now, you need to focus on yourself. You need to focus on yourself first and foremost and protect your energy and get rid of negative people. Eliminate negative people from your life in whatever ways you possibly can. Of course, within the law, but if you're in a toxic home environment, move out if you can. If not, get a job or find a way to spend less time at home. If you have toxic friends, drop them, cut them off. Just cut them off. You can still remain cordial. You can still shake their hand, be acquaintances, but you can't have any meaningful conversations with them. Do not give these people the opportunity to project their sense of realism onto you so that you inherit their doubts and confide in their misery. Make that make sense to me. Now, in addition to that, get off of social media. Get off of social media. Stop watching the news. I understand that social media can show you highly successful people, and that can be good for conditioning. If used with intent, social media can be a very powerful programming tool for your mind. But if we're being honest, okay, and this takes a lot of self-awareness, I can only speak for myself, but I'd assume that a lot of you are the same way. You're not really exposing yourself to that type of content on social media, at least not to the magnitude that offsets the negative content that you see. This right here is one of the biggest lifestyle changes that I ever made in my entire life, getting off of social media and focusing on myself. Just doing that alone allowed me the space to reprogram my subconscious mind and really settle into my sense of delusion. And that is what enabled me to occupy the position that I occupy right now. Because little do you guys know that I've been who I am right now since I quit that job. Since I quit that job at H&M March 9th, 2020 with $621.32 in my bank account. I have been this version of me since then. You guys are simply seeing it now because it's the physical representation of my inner sense of self back then. And the inner sense of self that I have right now, you guys will see in the future.